Hi, everybody. It's Peter Schiff. This is Monday, May 10th, 2010. Well, today the European politicians prove that they're every bit as irresponsible as American politicians. And the euro is now no better than the dollar, as far as I'm concerned, at least in the ultimate long term. In the short run, I still think that the dollar's problems are going to outnumber the euro's problems. But Europeans decided that they were going to bail out the creditors of the creditors of Greece, and potentially other European nations that are highly in debt. Of course, the best thing that Europe could have done would have been to allow Greece to default, to have not bailed them out. That would have been the best thing for the Greek people. It would have been the best thing for Europe. If Greece had been allowed to default, then Greece's creditors would have lost money. There would have been a restructuring. Instead, the creditors are bailed out. The losses are socialized, not just among the Greek citizens, but among all the citizens sharing the euro currency. Also, what this does is it sends a message to countries like Spain or Portugal. You can keep on going into debt. It sends a message to their creditors. Keep lending them money. Don't worry about how much money that they borrow. Because after all, if they can't pay it back, there's going to be a bailout, and the European Union will pay it back. Germany will pay it back. So there is no restraint anymore. What the European Union has just said is that no European government, none of the countries that share the euro, will default. That everybody will get paid, no matter how recklessly they borrow, no matter how indebted they become. If you lend money to a European country, you will get paid back. In other words, Europe is now like the United States. We have the same thing. We will pay you back. Why? Because we have a printing press. Well, that's what Europe says. Europe is going to print money. They're going to print euros instead of allowing anybody to default. You see, up until this weekend, I suppose people buying debt in Greece or Spain or France or Germany thought that there was a chance that there could be a default. Because after all, none of those countries could print euros. So the idea was that maybe there would be some monetary discipline. Now, my feeling is that many of the banks that were buying Greek debt knew that that was nonsense. They knew that when push came to shove, that Europe would balk and they would bail them out. And they were right. They bet right and they won. And the citizens of Europe lose. The same bets were made in America. You know, we did the same thing with Freddie and Fannie. When institutions bought Freddie and Fannie debt, right on the prospectus it said, the U.S. government does not guarantee this debt. Right? Buy it at your own risk. Yet a lot of institutions and a lot of banks bought Fannie and Freddie debt, despite the fact that these entities obviously insured way more debt than they can possibly guarantee. But the idea was, well, the U.S. government will never let them fail. And you know what? They were right. The U.S. government didn't let them fail. It should have, but we bailed them out. And now the U.S. government has assumed $6 trillion of debt. The bailout of Freddie and Fannie is far bigger than this European bailout. And of course, our bailout is not just going to be a Freddie and Fannie. What's going to happen when the states, like California, for example, when they can't pay their debts? Is the government going to bail them out? Sure, they probably will. I mean, they should let them default. Just like Europe should have let Greece default. But you know what? The politicians won't let anybody default. They don't want to admit that. They don't want their banker friends to lose money. They don't want to tell the voters the truth. But you know what? Everybody is going to lose more money in runaway inflation than through legitimate defaults. The big problem now in Europe is the moral hazard. Why should anybody act responsibly when they know they can get bailed out? Eventually, even the nations that are responsible, like in Germany, why are we being the responsible ones? Let's run up our deficits. You know, maybe this will be the end of the euro, the beginning of the end. I mean, maybe Germany will want out. They realize that it doesn't work. The whole idea was they had this fiscal responsibility pact where no country can have a debt greater than 3% of their GDP. Well, they threw that out the window. Now it's, have as debt as big as you want. And every country is trying to push the problems off on their neighbor. Same thing is going to happen in the United States. If federal government bails out one state, they bail out one state, they have to bail out all the states. Then, of course, once they're bailing out the The states are free to bail out the municipalities. Nobody has to fail. Nobody has to lose money. That's the attitude that ensures everybody loses money because we wipe out the value of the currency. Now, I do believe that the United States is further along the path than Europe. I think the moral hazards are going to take some time before they play out, and so the damage in Europe is going to occur over a period of time. I think the United States is much further along in the process. Now, I think it's funny where I see some Americans are objecting to the bailout because, of course, some of the money is coming from the IMF, and, I think 20% of that money, or close to it, comes from America. And people are upset that we're having to bail out Europe. Well, wait a minute. Where are we getting that money? We're borrowing it from China. We're borrowing it from Japan. They're the ones that should be upset. In fact, the Chinese are bailing out America every single day to a much larger extent than America is now participating in the bailout of Greece. Remember, what is Europe really going to be doing? They're going to be monetizing debt. The European Central Bank is going to go out and buy Greek bonds, Spanish bonds, Portuguese bonds, right? Italian bonds, any bonds that nobody wants. The Greek government, the European government is going to print money and buy them. They're monetizing the debt. Well, what do you think is happening right now with our debt? But it's not only the Federal Reserve that's been monetizing U.S. government debt. And, of course, we've monetized mortgage debt, car loans, student loans. But what about the Bank of China and in Japan and Saudi Arabia and all around the world? Those central banks are buying up our dollars. They're buying U.S. treasuries. They're buying mortgage-backed securities. We're getting a bailout from Asia every single day that's much bigger than what we're going to fork over or what we're going to borrow to recycle to participate in the Greek bailout. But again, this is not a bailout for the Greek people. This is a bailout for the bankers who lent the Greek government more money than the Greek people can possibly repay. And the Greek citizens are casualties. But now it's not just the citizens of Greece, but the citizens of Germany who are going to have to pay for Greece profligacy. And what kind of message, again, does that send to Germans? Hey, why don't the German politicians give bigger raises to German workers? After all, they're paying for the raises that the Greek workers are having. That's the moral hazard. And I said the same moral hazard is going to exist in the United States. Look, the big winner in this is going to be gold, going to be silver. The world is going to wake up to this con. I think that the Asian economies, countries like China, are going to have to look at this. Now they're going to have to support Europe in addition to the United States. How many people can ride in the wagon, right? Somebody's got to be out there pulling. America is running a huge current account deficit. If Europe is going to do the same thing, how can the emerging markets finance profligacy on both sides of the Atlantic by Europe and the United States? But this is the road that Europe is going down. As I said, America is much further down that road itself. Europe as a community is still a creditor nation, right? They're still net exporting. They're still a net lender. But that's going to turn around now based on what's happened over the weekend. And sure, the stock market rises. The Dow is up 400 points. Everything is great. Everyone's getting bailed out. Let's celebrate. But remember, part of the reason that stocks are going up is because people realize that cash is trash, that the governments are going to print money into oblivion, and that you can't own bonds, you can't own cash, you got to own real things. Now, right now, the central banks are buying bonds. So the bond market is being propped up, but the money they're printing to buy those bonds ultimately will render those bonds worthless, which is why people are buying equities. But that's also why people are buying gold. Gold sold off initially on this news. It was down about $18 or $20, but by the end of the day, it was only down a few dollars. People understand that this is not bearish for gold. It is bullish for gold because we are debasing the euro. And that means that the euro is no longer looking as appealing as an alternative to the dollar. And so more people don't want a fiat currency of any brand, even issued by the Eurozone. They prefer to have real money. They prefer to have money that cannot be debased. And the politicians are proving that they cannot be trusted with a printing press, because if they'll have it, they'll use it, even if they have to cross borders to do it, and it's not their own currency. Anyway, that's it for today. Take care, everybody.